I'm very curious because you decided to kind of take the tech entrepreneur path, right? And completely pivot away from what you've done in the past. And I want to hear about what made you make that decision, make that leap. And I'm sure your time at Yale has influenced you. Would be good to hear about how everything came together and how you made that transition.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So you're right. We go way back, and I think back to my time in grad school when we met as a point in my career where I was really interested in taking a step back from the 9 to 5 and working for a team. I used to work at an office in Toronto that was, as you know, a small kind of medium-sized planning firm, which had about 50 different staff members broken down between city planning staff, and then urban design staff. And I was more on the urban design side of the aisle. But the 4 years that I spent working in that office gave me a bit of insight into, early stage career concepts where you're looking at, how much you're being billed out at for clients, and they're paying a lot more than you're making for your hourly time on these projects. But you're also, junior staff under a team of folks who are really kind of leading the charge on these things. Yeah, you step away from that and you think about the potential of, do I go start my own city planning firm or urban design office? And I ended up working for a guy in New York City named Chris Counts, great guy, landscape architect. And it gave me a chance to see firsthand what starting your own sort of small urban design landscape architecture firm would look like. And Chris ran that office for a while before, I think, moving on to teaching and doing other things. And I think works for a larger office now, because it's ultimately a lot of work. It looked like, at that point in my career, I was moving away from the idea of, okay, I'm not cut out to go do what Chris is doing here. This is just too much for me to take on. But then going back to grad school, when we met, I got a renewed sense of entrepreneurial energy just because I was focusing a little bit more on software and technology, and had a chance to step back and think about how city planning and development was really driven by access to information, and that opportunity to go into a grad school program and take it in any direction you really wanted it. I always joked around like the forestry school, or what is now called the School of the Environment at Yale, was really an invent your own adventure type of program. You could take it in a number of different directions and kind of create what you wanted to create out of that. So I took it in the direction of GIS mapping, land use law, understanding more about how the legal frameworks around real estate development and city planning unfolded, and ultimately real estate finance. And those were areas in my urban design career that I just had a known sort of lack of knowledge and awareness around me. So I wanted to build on that. And that was what ultimately led me into this student, research project around how GIS mapping could lead to better decisions around the legal parameters of building cities, as well as the financial opportunities to go invest in property and develop land. So that's what really was the catalyst. The entrepreneurial zeal, if you will, like that's not something that I necessarily brought into it with me, until I felt like I could go off and start working on this. It was more of a curiosity than a zeal, I'd say, at that stage. And hindsight being...
So for us, I remember when we were doing student projects,
yeah,
it would spend weeks just gathering information and displaying information, right? 15 years ago, all this information was just behind different doors, right? And we had to just scrape them to, put them in one place. And I remember it being a very, very frustrating process, right? Because now with your platform, we can see all the information all at once. But in the past, you had to just go and find it in different places.
Yeah. So that prior stuff being more about just my personal journey into the entrepreneurship scene. Absolutely. The pain point that I experienced in city planning and urban design was this aggregation of knowledge that you ultimately need to go surface by kind of going to places. Like you could find some stuff online, you could do the research, you could even jump into Google Street Maps and Google Street View rather, and check things out from that. But it really ultimately came down to, you're only going to know what you know if you can engage with the people who make these places and who are stakeholders in these places. To really verify things requires that kind of on the ground sense of what's happening there. So that was the impetus behind, okay, well, let's make a really simple GIS tool, one that you don't need to have any GIS knowledge of in order to go put that information, put that knowledge into a map-based geospatially analytical, platform essentially.
Hmm.
And then within that platform, we could tie it to other records, enrich it, create neighborhood analyses and so forth. But the core premise behind what we were thinking about back then was it's got to be in GIS, but it's got to be put there by people who aren't ever going to understand that they're working with GIS.
Hmm.
Because GIS back then and still to this day, for a lot of people, is a technical toolkit. It's a technical piece of software that takes a lot of patience and understanding around how you're working with the tools. So yeah, I think you're right. It was, we were working on that project in Minneapolis as a student urban design competition, and you could see it there. You could see it kind of with anything you were doing in architecture, planning, real estate finance, where there was an opportunity or a client request to go help them with land use planning and investment, and it all hinged on, okay, well, where is this and what's happening there essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was very impressed because when we were students, because instead of kind of finding a job, you're like, I'm just going to launch this thing. What was it like to launch this? You weren't a programmer yourself, right? So you had to kind of build the technology over time. I mean, maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Just that journey.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
Just what I mean is, yeah, I didn't know what I was launching myself into really, and I didn't take a lot of time to think about it. I just kept going. In hindsight, I feel like actually going and finding a real job somewhere. I was offered an opportunity by a great guy who had launched a tech company in New Haven, Connecticut, and it was successful. It's already since been acquired by a bigger gov tech company, and I passed on that opportunity. And that's maybe a mistake that I made, but you never can look back and make, no regrets, obviously. I think it was a lot more than I realized, going off and trying to kind of figure things out as I go. But I passed on that opportunity to work for a bigger company while moonlighting on my own project, which is now Ginkgo and was called City Sense back then. For better and for worse, it has survived, it has grown, it has become more capable of standing on its own two legs as we go every year. But it definitely had a lot
Give
of,
me a second.
yeah, for sure.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I can hear you now. Sorry.
No, all
Keep
good. So
going.
yeah, I passed on that opportunity to really kind of take this in a more measured approach, focus on myself and my career more rather than the business and the startup. But I ended up going more, headfirst into the startup space, finding co-founders, getting into an accelerator program, thinking that was the right approach. And I think I'm not going to, dwell too much on the past, but basically the recommendation that I always give to other founders is if you have a day job or if you are getting out of school, go get a day job and then work on your idea as a side hustle until you're really confident essentially that it's going to stand up on its own without you, putting your own money and time into it so much. So yeah, I think in Ginkgo's case, it cost me several years of my career. It was a lot of sacrifices, but I think it pays to have the perseverance and the ability financially and otherwise to sacrifice your time and some of your goals personally if you want to launch a successful business or venture of any kind for that matter.
Yeah. I saw you from the side and I saw you how you were doing it. And I do think that because you didn't really hedge and you kind of dived all the way in, you got to where you did, right? I think it would have been more difficult to try to do this as a side hustle. And I think you gotten very far by kind of jumping in. But I did see the struggle to try to get that product to work, right? Because in the beginning you were working on kind of this GIS system and it wasn't really clear who it was for, and then it took you some years to kind of find that perfect customer. Why don't you talk about kind of that and where you ended up and maybe where the company is today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I didn't know what we were building initially. I always say there's two types of entrepreneurs. There's the type that has a very clear understanding of a business opportunity and they build a product for a market and they go out and they market to that audience and they build a successful business, hopefully. The other type of entrepreneur is the one who sees the world a certain way and thinks that there needs to be a product to move society in that direction. And I was probably more on the side of that latter type of entrepreneur. I didn't have a clear, basically that's to say I didn't have a clear understanding of who my audience was, what their needs were, what we had to build for them in order to provide value. It was definitely coming into the entrepreneurial space as something that investors would say, that's more of a painkiller, or
Hmm.
that's more of a vitamin than a painkiller was the term. And yeah, over time we made it a painkiller, not a vitamin. Obviously, we're a successful business at this point, but it took a long time to find out who that customer was and who that target audience would be, that beachhead market. So early days, we were being told, to avoid government as a customer, as an audience, because they just move slowly. It takes years to get a deal done. And we said, no, we're gonna try government. So early days, we focused on selling the city government with Ginkgo, and it was City Cents back then. But we got a few deals done, and then realized after getting up to a point where we were talking to larger cities, Detroit, Michigan was our focus, that government was not going to be the right customer because they weren't really that hands-on with the software. They didn't operate the way that we thought they might. And that's because none of us had any experience working in government. We'd worked for government as consultants, but we'd never been in the position of someone in a city planning department for a town or city. So that's a very different persona that we didn't bring to the awareness around our business model at the time. So what we did learn, though, from going to city government was, certainly that they weren't the right audience to start with, but that there was another audience that we had potentially overlooked even early days, who really fit exactly what we were looking for as a target audience. If we're talking again about managing information about places, we thought, okay, government's going to be the right place to go. In reality, it turned out to be these nonprofit organizations that operate as partners of the government who were the real audience of users to target. They were the ones who really understood the dynamics at that local kind of neighborhood level that we had been looking to unlock. And it was extremely helpful to do the work we did in Detroit, not because we, got a big deal with Detroit. We didn't. The city said, no, this is not a product for us. It's a product for the neighborhood organizations in this city. And that actually was a big deal for us because it gave us really clear signal on where to go next, which was to focus on cities that have a rich population of neighborhood organizations and a strong set of programming elements in place to support the work they're doing on the ground. While Detroit has great resources and people leading the charge as well, it's not a large enough city to support what we were looking for at that point as a real beachhead market. So we ended up focusing on New York City, which made a lot more sense. New York's the largest city in North America, or at least in the US, not North America. I think it's surpassed by Mexico City. But it's the largest city in the US. It has the most business improvement districts, which I'll talk about in a bit more. And it also is, of course, the city which probably has the most competition for products in our space. So we decided, okay, let's focus on a place where we have a variety of typologies of this customer, this audience of neighborhood groups. Let's focus on a place where we know we'll have competition if there is competition out there, because it's New York. And if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. But that's part of the logic of why we shifted from city government into this niche space of neighborhood organizations and nonprofits that in our mind's eye really presented the right mix of stakeholder representation and autonomy in the decision-making process of whether to use new technology.
So maybe you could talk a little bit more about, so you're not dealing with New York City, the city government, right? You're kind of still, you're targeting New York City, but the neighborhood organizations.
Yeah, it's super interesting. The space that Ginkgo really landed in, it's called place management. And when people experience a place, so let's take Bryant Park, which is a very active and well-known public space in New York City, right in Midtown. When people experience that place, the general tourist or even resident of New York City would think, oh, this is a great public park. And it's great because there's so much going on here. There's skating in the wintertime. There's movies and bocce and markets and just things you can do in that space. And people can all congregate there. You can go there to read a book. You can go there to meet friends. You can kind of make it your own space. So it's a really successful park. But the main thing that I'm bringing up here is not that, parks are great and people can enjoy them. It's to make a point about why they're great. Bryant Park, unbeknownst to most people who walk through that park, sit there, read a book, skate in the winter and watch a movie in the summer, isn't managed by New York City. It's managed by a private organization called the Bryant Park Corporation. And knowing that alone really set the stage for us as a digital product company to go build products for those people. Knowing that our parks and our public spaces have this operational entity behind them that's not just the city government, presented us with a huge opportunity to go and actually create products for that group of organizations managing public space that could really do two things. One, improve the way they're working, so providing them with basic day-to-day operational efficiency because they have access to the tools and information resources they need. And two, to strengthen their partnerships with the many other organizations they work with, ranging from the city, the government, obviously, to all of the private stakeholders in their orbit. So the property owners, the business owners, the real people that are kind of invested in this neighborhood area. So that's where we found the right balance of this sort of public-private partnership ecosystem to go and actually impact change in the cities that we wanted to help. So it came somewhat full circle for us at that point. And that was a long time ago as well, but it was to basically create that, it was to bookend that journey of, okay, entrepreneurial interest in building something that can help the world, which is, again, it's an idealist view of entrepreneurship, to finding an actual way to do that, which came full circle with finding this group that manage business improvement districts, main streets, downtowns, and building tools for very specific uses that they have as place management organizations.
So I find that interesting. So, what you described as these, the Bryant Park Corporation or these private organizations running these public spaces that nobody really knows about, right? Like nobody understands that this is privately run. There's a group of people really focused on making the spaces really active and working. And really those people are focused on kind of running the space. They're not focused on marketing, what they're doing or, kind of elucidating the public on what they're doing. And what your software seems to be doing is allowing them to put all that data into your platform so that people can understand better what's happening, so that people will understand the value of that, but also allowing the people, like who are running the parks to understand what they're doing better as well. So maybe can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll even say we failed. We failed early stage with our understanding of how to turn Ginkgo into a investable startup. And that's to say, like, you're a startup, it's the it's 2017, 18. Back then, the idea of building a business as a software company, software as a service, SaaS, focused on really kind of building something that you could then take to venture capital sources or venture capital investors. And they would say, yeah, there's a huge market here. It's $1 billion business. Let's go help you build this and make it a unicorn or something, bigger than what I think I see it as right now. And I don't mean to say I see this as a small business, but it's to say that we failed at going in that direction with it. And I think in hindsight, it was a really good failure. But I bring that up because as we were building a product, we came into this space with this goal of raising money from venture capital. That was what we had been told we really are supposed to do. And we did try. We tried to create a business model where we were going to build a product that connected private investors and developers with really high quality local insight about these busy commercial corridors and downtowns and cities. And we took that all the way to a point where we had Citigroup, the bank, and their team called City Ventures looking at doing a deal with us to help their opportunity zone investors find opportunities to invest in real estate and businesses in these specific areas. And it really highlighted the issue we were up against with this at that point, like our concept of making Ginkgo a VC backed business. The issue was scalability. We didn't really have a way of scaling our platform to all of the country's opportunity zones in a way that would have met the needs of the other side of the coin there, the
Hmm.
investors, the small businesses that want to open businesses and new stores in these areas. So we failed at that, but it enabled me personally to focus on moving the business towards something more practical and pragmatic without venture backing. And that has been a lot more successful, I think. And this kind of gets into more personal founder goals than kind of bigger entrepreneurial stories. So it's, for me, I don't think I ever really wanted to grow it into a big VC backed company.
Yeah.
To me, that was a realization that I think I made.
Yeah. So I think the thing that I'm interested in is your ultimately, you your goal, right, for the company today, right, is quite interesting, right, working with bids and these different organizations, and this podcast is about making places and stuff stable, or allows the different organizations to map their data into it so that people can understand what's happening on the ground. So
Yeah,
uh,
no, that's true. It's interesting to see to this day when we're onboarding a new business improvement district as a customer, or even a city that has business improvement district programs. It's interesting to see that there's still this subtle disconnect in how people think about placemaking and place management and where the data that informs that process comes from in their mind's eye. They, at the end of the day, understand when you walk them through Ginkgo or other products and say, okay, here's some data about this place, or here's some information about this place. They understand, I think, innately that this information might not be right because it's not coming from people in this place. It's typically coming from third-party sources. Maybe it's big tech companies like CoStar, who's doing research with hundreds, if not thousands of staff behind the
yeah.
research. Or maybe it's coming from the city government and some of their data systems tracking building permit updates or 311 requests.
Hmm.
But there's this innate skepticism towards all of these third-party sources of data and information, rightfully so. And so they ultimately have to ask Ginkgo or anyone else involved with helping them organize information about their place, the question of, well, where's this information coming from? And you walk them through the sources and you can get them so far, but the real crux is that to create great places requires real on the ground work. And that real on the ground work is the best source of the data about the place. If you're interested in understanding a place, from whatever perspective you want to have, investment, operations, government, private sector, going to the place and experiencing it or doing work in that place is the best way to get that information. What we've done with Ginkgo is we've provided the tool to generate or to aggregate information from those third-party sources. And there's lots of tools out there that do that. Some of those tools even claim that they're the best analysis of, or the best source of insight about these places. But what we really do with Ginkgo is provide those third-party sources in order to point out that the best source is going to be the people actually doing the work on these places, the organizations that we target as our customers, the people who know it because they're working on it. And that's basically to say that to really provide a product that's, I think, unique today is to acknowledge, or to provide a product in the place-based information exchange space today is to acknowledge that you need to have a product that both combines the third-party sources of data about place with the information and operational insights coming from the first-party users, the people who use Ginkgo as their CRM.
Yeah. So when you say CRM, like give us some more insights into what that means.
Okay, yeah. So CRM is a term, it stands for customer relationship management. And honestly, when I was at grad school with you, I didn't really know what a CRM was. I had come across, Salesforce and HubSpot, which I don't think was even being coined as a CRM back then. But there are a number of these tools out there nowadays, and most of them cater to managing your relationships with customers, and they cater to the sales and marketing use case. Now, in my world of place management with Ginkgo, sales and marketing is a little bit, it's not like there isn't sales and marketing, but it's very different from what you would picture as sales and marketing. So while yes, there is a quote unquote customer,
Hmm.
that's not someone you're trying to create a financial transaction with. In our space, managing places, your customer might be someone who is unhoused and you're offering services to this individual in order to help them transition into support for mental illness or housing. And so
Hmm.
it's a very different stakeholder, but it's pretty similar technology, oddly enough, at the end of the day. You still want to be able to create a contact for that individual. You still want to be able to track your engagements with that individual. And you ultimately want to be able to coordinate with your partners in the space that you are serving. So that's a very different type of CRM than the traditional deployment of Salesforce or HubSpot, which are more focused on, tracking profiles for large corporate organizations or small businesses and
Hmm.
understanding the persona of these customers and all of your sales calls and maybe your routes as a door-to-door person. I don't know what
Yep.
case may be, but we're focused on CRM. We're just focused on CRM in a very different way than I think most
Yeah.
traditional CRM systems.
Yeah. So maybe it'll be helpful to hear about some of the use cases. Um,
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think one of the reasons that Ginkgo is again so unique as a CRM is because of its GIS underpinning as a product. And GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems or Geospatial Information Systems. It's a very old technology in the grand scheme of things. It came, about really in the 1980s under the innovations of the military and then commercialized by ESRI, ESRI, which stands for Earth Science Research Institute, and they provide a large suite of software for the GIS space. Most of the organizations in the world today have certainly adopted, large governments that is, have adopted ESRI software for managing their geospatial inventories. We built Ginkgo on GIS because we understood that there was a lot of data already in the GIS landscape. I'd worked with it, you'd worked with it.
mhm.
We were working with it as city planning professionals and architects. And most of our experience with GIS was always to go in and say, well, I need these lines for this block or for this building polygon. I need to be able to pull them into a map where then I can translate this information into a visual that people will, from the general public out there will understand. You don't give someone a GIS file and say, hey, here's my plan. You take a GIS file and you translate that into beautiful maps and illustrations and, tools to convey an idea through imagery. So GIS presented the nicest way for us to access a lot of the information about places that was already out there in the world and then enrich information from the individuals who worked on these places with that third party GIS data. And I think that's all basically to highlight a very unique use case for Ginkgo, which is tracking places through our CRM system is actually supported by the GIS data that underpins everything because you're able to create a relationship between your records and other public data and records that exist within Ginkgo as these GIS layers. So that might not make very much sense, but as an example, think of a parcel of land, think of a property. Those records change annually when people assess property, and to be able to tie your records back to these, tie your contact records for people, tie your business records for storefront tenants back to these government data sets that inform what those records really are off of is extremely useful for most of our customers who try to keep track of all these things
Hmm.
in a more organized way. So in a simple use case, say you want to manage a main street of small businesses and you've got a name for each business, you've maybe got a category like food and drink or shopping, and you've got an address, but you don't have a way to map that all out and tie it back to the actual real estate that these small businesses operate in. Ginkgo does all of that automatically. You don't have to spend time going and saying storefront Y is occupied by coffee shop X, which is tied back to building Z, which is owned by Joe Schmo. Like that's all done by importing your spreadsheet of businesses with 5 fields. And it's going to create this dynamic data set that ties back to all the third-party data related with that place, the property records, the building permits, all of these things that you can contextualize because you've put your data into a system like Ginkgo.
Cool. Ultimately, it sounds like you're really just taking all the information from a place and you're kind of digitizing it and databasing it. And how does that, if you can translate that back, right? I mean, ultimately, we're thinking about the place and the physical place, right? How do
Yeah.
you think people use that to make better decisions, like the when you talk about the bids and so on?
Yeah, sure. It's sort of like, okay, well, I get it. You're putting a whole bunch of data into a database, and maybe it's organized really well from this perspective of data about places. But why? Why would you bother doing any of this? And there's a number of reasons. One of the reasons is operationally. If you're managing a place, you want the place to be clean. You want the place to be safe. People aren't going to go to Bryant Park if it's dangerous and if it's, covered in trash and litter and hypodermic needles on the ground. Like, these are all just things that would deter someone from actually going to a place. And that's something that a lot of our customers using Ginkgo track. They track the day-to-day operations of people sweeping the street, removing graffiti, removing hazardous waste, like I just mentioned, and really engaging with the stakeholders and other, patrons of the public realm in ways that support the operations of that place. So a way to think about it is, if you've ever been to a shopping mall, the common space in that mall is all operated by the property owner, and they might contract with someone to come in and empty trash cans and clean and make sure that, it's a clean space for you to go and find what you're looking for in that mall from the various retailers that operate there. Now, place management's pretty similar. It's just abstracted onto a much more complicated scale because you're talking about actual public space, not a single property that one, big owner owns, but public space that's owned by you and me and everyone else who's out there living and working and playing in a city. And that is a much more complicated fabric also, because your stakeholders are not just the businesses, but they're the property owners in the city and all of these agencies that work with the cities. You have to have more transparency generally in order for that system to be successful, because of the fact that you're surrounded by, I'd say, 10 times as many partnerships to make your operations successful in a place as dynamic as a city or a downtown. And so to facilitate that data transparency, where I'm going with all of this is, you need to be able to quickly pull information out of the system, ensure that it's provided in a way where people trust it and where it's able to be actionable for the use cases that data might inform. It might be just data on where you've removed graffiti this month, and you need to be able to show the people who are investing in your organization that you're having this impact. It might be data on, unhoused clients who you're helping find services that will support their matriculation into society again. And you need to go share that with a housing provider or a state-run health and public services organization. So there's a myriad of partners in the place management arena that look at these organizations and say, we want to help, but please show us how. And in some cases, they have a mandate to help, but they need to know how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fascinating. I mean, because it's not obvious, right? To like, the bid is not this idea that you're going to basically collect extra taxes, right? To run the public space of the public realm. Seems conceptually like the right move, but for some, they may think, I don't want to pay taxes, or, I think the public realm's good enough. Or, there may be some political opposition in a bid, right? I would rather spend the money on affordability or public housing or whatever it may be. It sounds to me is that by collecting the data and then it allows the bid to make a case for its existence, right? Or maybe it's just and by sharing that with everybody else too, right? So
yeah, it's certainly not bulletproof, but
yeah,
as the adage goes, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And often when I'm onboarding a customer who is interested in Ginkgo, it's because they've had trouble measuring something, because they didn't have the data. They didn't have the operational system in place to really measure what their work is impacting. And that's, they're still doing the work. So there might be some sort of anecdotal story behind why it's impactful and how it's doing someone a service. But ultimately, if you're not able to really look at it day to day, week to week, and year over year and look at these trends and changes, it's very difficult to know what sort of an impact your organization, you personally, or any of these things are really having.
Let's start with favorite city in the world.
Edinburgh.
That's interesting. Why?
Well, aside from it being in Scotland, I just love Scotland and my Scottish heritage. I think Edinburgh is a fascinating city. They've got an extinct volcano in the middle, which basically is a incredible public space to interact with for recreational hiking and everything else. And they've managed to create a dynamic yet culturally significant downtown around the city, as well as the opportunity for new development to integrate with all of that in a very sensible way.
Okay, cool. That's very cool. And what's the most overrated place?
Overrated. I think there's plenty of overrated places in the southeastern part of the U.S. and probably southwestern too. I don't know. I think the Sun Belt really has overrated places, but that's just
in general, like the South.
The South
is just overrated. I mean, the people are just.
I think there's a lot of really wonderful historic cultural elements about the South. I've got plenty of favorite places, south of the Mason-Dixie line or south in the southern U.S. But I'd say the most overrated place is probably Miami. I'd say it is created on the premise of entertainment, and I don't think it has maybe I should take that back. I'd say the most overrated place is Las Vegas, maybe, because it's not really a place. It
is a place in its own way.
Yeah, it's a place, but it doesn't have the dynamics of, I guess my definition of overrated ties to how functional a place is for a diverse range of people. And if a place functions in a way that most people can find value from it, then it's deserving of all of its ratings. If it really only functions for one type of person or a very specific demographic, then I think it's not just overrated, it's sort of wasteful of land. And therefore, I don't think it's a place. So maybe my rating is place versus no place. And there's a lot of places that really function as, single purpose and could be so much more based on how much infrastructure we put into building these places.
That's interesting.
So I haven't really highlighted a single one of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think there's a component of a city, right, that's just not about infrastructure. There's more to it, right? So, for example, I would argue that cities like Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and New York City, the main driving forces behind this are not just physical infrastructure, but the imagery and kind of the dreams, right, that it creates, right? So, for example, like Los Angeles, for example, doesn't even have any natural water courses, a desert. And the reason why it was able to become the city that it is because of Hollywood and people dreaming about, orange groves and the beautiful weather there, right? And I think the same is for New York City. I think there's a reason why people all over the world come to New York City, despite the fact, that, there's rats on the streets and garbage on the sidewalks, right? That you don't have alleys, right? And homeless people in the subway system. Is because of the kind of the dream of what New York City is. Yeah. In Las Vegas, there is that element. It's a slightly different, right? That kind of dream, right? Like, make it rich, right? Quickly, right? There is that element to it. So I would argue that I'm not sure about overrated versus underrated, but there is something about Las Vegas that beyond.
Do you think New York's overrated?
I don't buy into that argument, but I mean, New York City is not overrated.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure I'm completely sold on the idea of it not being overrated.
I think on like the infrastructure in New York City is crumbling, right? And in that sense, it is overrated. At the same time, it has a level of energy that no other city has.
Yeah,
right?
It's an interesting question. I mean, it definitely, now that we're diving into it, just we got to define what rating system we're applying to the situation, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, but I was thinking more about like a place, right? I mean, like a small. It's open ended, right? We can talk about cities, or we can talk about like Times Square, for example. So
sure.
I wanted to kind of leave it up to you. So the other question is, what's an underrated place?
I see. So at that place scale, I think underrated is an interesting. Again, I go to places where the capability of having multiple people interact with a place. And by multiple, I don't mean many people, I mean different people. Types of people interacting with a place defines the ratings. So an example of that might be Jersey City. Downtown, it's the historic downtown in Jersey City, I think has a lot of potential. I don't necessarily think that the organizations running that place, though, are very good. Always wanted there to be a stronger delineation between DMOs and bids. And DMOs are destination marketing organizations.
To shape places yourself. What's a place that shaped you before you had any power to shape places yourself?
Toronto has a lot of them. I spent 4 years there as the first job that I had out of undergrad. And I lived on Queen West and moved east every year or two towards Spadina, which is kind of a more central north-south corridor, pretty close to downtown. Anyway, I'd bring up Toronto because there's a lot of development happening in Toronto, and it has boomed in the last 20 years with growth and development. So seeing that transition of place based, largely on real estate investment has shaped how I see success and failure of places. And I think a lot of places are criticized for not having soul or character simply because they don't have a lot of history to them. But I think any place can really have the sort of character qualities or the soul of what these people talk about, regardless of its history, regardless of how many old buildings there are and how many new buildings have been built and kind of paved over old things. But I just think what it comes down to is the people behind these places and how they make them authentic. So authenticity is something I found in Toronto and continue to find there whenever I visit, because people look at a place as, again, something that is accessible to multiple types of people. They want many different types of people to come to these places because that's what they're designed for. And it's a proactive approach to creating and managing a space, a public space in particular, because of the fact that you're opening this up to possibility, serendipity, and all these things that multiple types of people will bring to that place if it's open to them.
Yeah, so it's kind of, that ties into the second question that I asked you. What makes a place work, not financially or politically, but humanly?
I think access is the key thing that makes a place work. And if it's, I mean, yeah, you can have the most bland, dry, unauthentic version of that, and it's still accessible. But what I mean is it's inviting. It's not just because there's a handicap ramp and, some Braille plaques on the wall. That's not what I mean by accessibility in this case. What I really mean is it's very clear that the place is designed for people to come to and to interact with because of the design because the design decisions and the programming around the space. Again, I
think that makes sense. I think on a design, I think I understand what you're saying, because I think that the previous answer you said, it's talked about authenticity. And I do agree, having people, the serendipity, right, that comes from people just colliding with each other, right?
Yeah.
And
it's hard to create
that really creates, yeah.
It's not easy. I mean, you've seen a lot of interesting work in the last 20 years of, placemaking, which is a sort of a variation of place management, but it's become a focal point for taking public space and kind of just adding color to it. I don't think that really accomplishes what we're talking about, but it's a start, and it's definitely better than nothing in a lot of these places.
Yeah.
But yeah,
okay.
adding a bit of color brings people's awareness of engagement around that. You can say, oh, there's something more colorful over there. Let's go hang out over there and see what's going on, because it's just different in these cases.
Yeah. So do you see yourself more as a builder, a curator, a connector, or a protector of a place? Why? If you can lock yourself in one of these categories. Yep.
I see myself as a builder, but in building, I would say I seek to, I certainly seek to curate, but I would say I seek to make accessibility a lot more.
I do think that you are kind of a curator and a connector, really.
A connector.
In this case, builder would be like someone who literally builds buildings, but you are kind of building your startup. So I give you that. You're many different roles, really.
I'm fascinated by the digital product space in the building sense. I like to build product, and that has only become easier to do with all of the new artificial intelligence tools. But it's also, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think if you abstract my passion for building, it's to support the connections that I think need to happen around place.
Next one. What's one thing people don't see that's essential to make a place successful?
One thing that people don't see that is essential for making a place successful. Leadership, probably. I mean, there needs to be someone kind of carrying the torch, at least one person. You might have a whole team or even a organization as large as the Times Square Alliance with $20+ million behind them doing it. But one single person can make or break a successful place.
Yeah, that's great. Where do people's interests collide most when creating a place?
That's so interesting because you would think that really dense urban downtowns would be the most controversial areas where, egos collide and agendas collide and really stakeholders just get in each other's way so much that nothing gets done. But I find in small towns, that's
Yeah.
actually more pervasive in some cases. So even, a town with 3 businesses, there might be not like more nonprofit organizations kind of overseeing the success of this place than there are local businesses. That might actually be an impediment to the success of that place because not a single one of those organizations is willing to essentially take it all the way. They all want to have a hand in the process, but they don't know how to coordinate together effectively to get the work done. So I think that's where you run into contention is around, whose job is it anyway for these
Hmm.
things to actually get done?
Okay. So if you could experience any fictional place, film, TV, or literature, where would you go and why?
Fictional place? I'd probably try to go to um, Rivendell in Tolkien's universe or
That's very
Minas
interesting.
Tirith. Yeah, I think like my head goes either to utopian fantasy, strongholds, or it goes to like the other end of the spectrum with
I mean,
sci-fi.
so it's a Tolkien. I mean, I was always curious about this. I mean, do they have in Lord of the Rings? Do people take showers?
Well, I think it depends on which race you're talking about. I don't
I
know.
know, but like the hobbits, I mean, did they? I just don't remember what that situation was like in the.
You can be sure that the Uruks and no, I think people shower in their own, ways. I think the
Yeah,
hobbits jump into the ponds in the Shire, and
yeah,
um, yeah, it's a good question.
yeah.
Showering,
It's interesting.
but cleanliness is a very important part of placemaking
Yeah,
or place management.
absolutely. So I think this is pretty easy question. Do you prefer shaping a single block or a district or a citywide system?
I would prefer a single block. And the reason I choose that as the unit instead of a larger system is not because I don't want to shape the larger system. It's because I see that as a impactful unit to start with, as a test or as a way to inform, where other larger systems might evolve over time. So look at the pilot opportunities and try to find something that is representative of a larger whole and focus on that in order to find a change that works.
What's a place that failed and what did it teach you?
Place that failed. Interesting.
It could be about something like it's maybe you talked about Detroit, or it can be something related to kind of your work.
Yeah, and I don't want to. I mean, I'll try to answer the question, but I think failure is an interesting term to define here a little bit because the New Haven failed, and I think we can approach that from a number of perspectives. There's the time frame that we're talking about. What defines failure in this case? But I want to bring up New Haven because its failure is really the antithesis of, I think, what a lot of the success stories in placemaking and managing places effectively it's from. The failure of New Haven came in the 50s, was it, or the 60s during the urban renewal period where, the esteems
Which happened all over the place, right? That the highways
yeah,
cutting through neighborhoods and the air rights garage and so on. That
exactly.
basically
Yeah.
divided
You,
up
you
the
would
city.
honestly probably know it better than I do, but
Yeah.
it's just a story of failure because of the fact that the city wasn't able to take investment. I think the most investment any city in the country had been awarded back then from the federal government and turn that public money into actual progress. Instead, actually removed the neighborhood fabric that had been organically, building in the 9 squares, and it bifurcated neighborhoods. It created highways. It did a lot of things at the behest of very few people's interests. And I think that's where place management and making great places, again, goes back to, if they want to succeed, they have to create an open dialogue. Not actually like, and I'm not even suggesting like actually talk to other people, but certainly that as well. But create a dialogue for sharing and information exchange that can inform the right direction to go in. Because otherwise you end up investing in the wrong things. And New Haven is just a hallmark of that.
Yeah.
If you
I
look
think
back.
back then, cities were seen differently, right?
Oh
So
yeah,
these,
no, and I should preface, I'm not talking about New Haven today.
yeah,
You
it's
didn't, you
very,
didn't
yeah,
give me a time frame, so I can point fingers at it
yeah,
in the
exactly.
60s and the 70s.
20 years from now, what do you hope people never notice about your work because it just works?
Yeah, I mean, so we've designed Ginkgo very intentionally around interoperability with other tools, and there are three reasons that has evolved within the product. The first reason is because I, had two co-founders that stepped away from the business very early on in the company's growth, and I had to figure out how to build the product without software engineers. And so
Hmm.
that necessitated, connecting Ginkgo to other tools that existed out there, which was good. It made sure that I didn't reinvent things that already existed and instead just plugged them into my product. And it really made sense to focus on the core value that my Ginkgo was building on, as opposed to trying to replicate something that already existed. But another reason that it was really helpful is because a lot of our customers had been using something already, and they didn't want to abandon, learned behaviors within their organization, whether it was Salesforce or Airtable or even just Google Sheets and Microsoft Outlook. These are tools that all just had to kind of plug in. And we didn't want to come into a situation where we weren't going to be useful to anyone because, we didn't work with other tools. So interoperability is core to why I hope that Ginkgo is not seen as, the one thing people think about when they're doing work around place. I don't think that'll ever happen because it's never going to be the one thing. It's going to be the piece of a larger ecosystem of solutions that all come together around
Yeah.
coordination and place management.
Yeah. That's great. So, thank you for answering all the questions. And this is our first podcast. And the reason I wanted to talk to you first was because when I think of all my colleagues and everybody I've known throughout my whole entire career, you're one of the most idealistic people out there in terms of placemaking. I remember when we were doing the development competition together, you were the one who was championing the park, right? For when I was talking about we need to save the money to build buildings.
Yeah.
And it's really rewarding as a friend to see you transform into this tech entrepreneur over the past 15 years, and having built this platform and transform yourself into something that's very different from what I remember you to be as a student. I do firmly believe your thesis that getting the data and putting in that public data and working with bids and other kind of local organizations and using that data to somehow help them make better decisions, and also for the public to access the data so that they can make better decisions and collaborate. It's a very, very powerful and useful tool that you're building. And I do believe in your thesis, it's an important part of placemaking ultimately. I think it's the foundational part of it, to be able to understand things through data. So, I'm really happy to have you and talk to you in depth about everything, your journey, and what you're thinking. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.